We continue Plutarch's Lives, translated by John Dryden, revised by Arthur Hugh Clough, by starting on Nicias. Crassus, in my opinion, may most properly be set against Nicias and the Parthian disaster compared with that in Sicily. But here it will be well for me to entreat the reader, in all courtesy, not to think that I contend with Thucydides in matters so pathetically, vividly, and eloquently beyond all imitation, and even beyond himself expressed by him, nor to believe me guilty of the like folly with Timaeus, who, hoping in his history to surpass Thucydides in art, and to make Philistus appear a tripler and a novice, pushes on his descriptions through all the battles, sea fights, and public speeches, in recording which they have been most successful, without meriting so much as to be compared, in Pindar's phrase, one that on his feet would with the Lydian cars compete. He simply shows himself all along a half-lettered, childish writer, in the words of Diphilus, of wit obese, or larded with Sicilian grace. Now, of wit obese, or larded with Sicilian grease. Often he sinks to the very level of Xenarchus, telling us that he thinks it ominous to the Athenians that their general, who had victory in his name, was unwilling to take command in the expedition, and that the defacing of the Herma was a divine intimation that they should suffer much in the war of Hermocrates, the son of Hermon, and, moreover, how it was likely that Hercules should aid the Syracusans for the sake of Proserpine, by whose means he took Cerberus, the dog thing, and should be angry with the Athenians for protecting the Augustans, descended from Trojan ancestors, whose city he, for an injury of their king Laomedon, had overthrown. However, all these may be merely other instances of the same happy taste that makes him correct the diction of Philistus and abuse Plato and Aristotle. This sort of contention and rivalry with others in matter of style, to my mind, in any case, seems petty and pedantic, but when its objects are works of inimitable excellence, it is absolutely senseless. Such actions in Nicias' life as Thucydides and Philistus have related, since they cannot be passed by, illustrating as they do most, especially his character and temper, under his many and great troubles, that I may not seem altogether negligent, I shall briefly run over, and such things as are not commonly known, and lie scattered here and there in other men's writings, are found amongst the old monuments and archives, I shall endeavor to bring together, not collecting mere useless pieces of learning, but deducing what may make his disposition and habit of mind understood. First of all, I would mention what Aristotle has said of Nicias, that there had been 3 good citizens, eminent above the rest for their hereditary affection and love to the people: Nicias, the son of Niceratus; Thucydides, the son of Melesias; and Theramenes, the son of Hagnon, but the last less than the others, for he had his dubious extraction cast in his teeth as a foreigner from Chaos, and his inconsistency which made him side sometimes with one party, sometimes with another in public life, and which obtained him the nickname of Buskin. thus keen. Thucydides came earlier, and on the behalf of the nobility was a great opponent of the measures by which Pericles courted the favor of the people. Nicias was a younger man, yet was in some reputation even whilst Pericles lived, so much so as to have been his colleague in the office of general, and to have command by himself more than once. But on the death of Pericles, he presently rose to the highest place, chiefly by the favor of the rich and eminent citizens, who set him up for the bulwark against the presumption and insolence of Cleon. Nevertheless, he did not forfeit the goodwill of the commonalty, who likewise contributed to his advancement. For though Cleon got great influence by his exertions to please the old men who trusted him to find them fees, yet even those for whose interest and to gain whose favor he acted, nevertheless observing the avarice, the arrogance, the presumption of the man, many of them supported Nicias, for his was not that sort of gravity which is harsh and offensive, but he tempered it with a certain caution and deference, winning upon the people by seeming afraid of them, and being naturally diffident and unhopeful in war. His good fortune supplied his want of courage, and kept it from being detected, as in all his commands he was constantly successful, and his timorousness in civil life and his extreme dread of accusers was thought very suitable in a citizen of a free state, and from all the people's goodwill towards him got him no small power over them, they being fearful of all that despised them, but willing to promote one who seemed to be afraid of them. The greatest compliment their betters could pay them being not to contemn them. Pericles, who, by solid virtue and the pure force of argument, ruled the commonwealth, had stood in need of no disguises nor persuasions with the people. Nicias, inferior in these respects, uses riches, of which he had abundance to gain popularity. Neither had he the nimble wit of Cleon to win the Athenians to his purposes by amusing them with bold jests. Unprovided with such qualities, he courted them with dramatic exhibitions, gymnastic games, and other public shows, more sumptuous and more splendid than had ever been known in his or in former ages. Amongst his religious offerings there was extant, even in our days, the small figure of Minerva in the citadel, having lost the gold that covered it, and a shrine in the temple of Bacchus, under the tripods that were presented by those who won the prize in the shows or plays. Sometimes tripods are like, it's part of the mystical device, right? Because sometimes it does matter how many sides and stuff to have the effect, or at least have the psychic connection to the symbol. That perhaps they can't bring about in certain individuals with other shapes that were presented by those who won the prize in the shows or plays. For at these he had often carried off the prize, and never once failed. We are told that on one of these occasions a slave of his appeared in the character of Bacchus, of a beautiful person and noble stature, and with as yet no beard upon his chin, and on the Athenians being pleased with the sight and applauding a long time, Nicias stood up and said he could not, in piety, keep as a slave one whose person had been consecrated to represent a god, and forthwith he had set the young man free. His performances at Delos, also on record as noble and magnificent works of devotion, for whereas the choruses which the cities sent to sing hymns to the entity were wont to arrive in order, as it might happen, and being there met by a crowd of people crying out to them to sing, in their hurry to begin, used to disembark confusedly, putting on their garlands, and changing their dresses as they left the ships. He, when he had to convoy the sacred company, disembarked the chorus at together with the sacrifices and other holy appurtenances, and having brought along with him from Athens a bridge fitted by measurement for the purpose, and magnificently adorned with gilding and colouring, and with garlands and tapestries, he laid in the night over the channel betwixt Crania and Delos, being no great distance, and at break of day he marched forth with all the procession to the entity, and moved the chorus, sumptuously ornamented, and singing their hymns, along over the bridge, the sacrifices, the games, and the feast being over. He set up a palm tree of brass for a present to the entity, and bought a parcel of land with 10,000 drachmas, which he consecrated. With the revenue, the inhabitants of Delos were to sacrifice and to feast, and to pray to the entities for many good things to Nicias. This he engraved on a pillar, which he left in Delos to be a record of his bequest. This same palm tree, afterwards broken down by the wind, fell on the great statue which the men of Naxos presented, and struck it to the ground. It is plain that much of this might be vainglory, and the mere desire of popularity and applause, yet from other qualities and carriages of the man, one might believe all this cost and public display to be the effect of devotion, for he was one of those who dreaded the divine powers extremely, and, as Thucydides tells us, was much given to arts of divination. In one of Pasiphae's dialogues, it is stated that he daily sacrificed to the entities, and keeping a diviner at his house, wonder what type of divination, but obviously hiring a soothsayer, professed to be consulting always about the Commonwealth, but for the most part inquired about his own public affairs, more especially concerning his silver mines, for he owned many works at Laurium of great value, but somewhat hazardous to carry on. He maintained there a multitude of slaves, and his wealth consisted chiefly in silver. Hence he had many hangers-on about him, begging and obtaining, for he gave to those who could do him mischief no less than to those who deserved well. In short, his timidity was a revenue to rogues, and his humanity to honest men. We find testimony in the comic writers, as when Teleclides, speaking, one of the professed informers, says, Charicles gave the man a pound, the matter not to name, that from inside a money bag into the world he came. And Nicias also paid him for. I know the reason well, but Nicias is a worthy man, and so I will not tell. Now, of course, Latin or Greek or whatever that these verses were originally in, I'm guessing that was supposed to be in Greek at some point. Yeah, they probably sounded better than the English. Although, the book of Revelations in English sounds better than it does in Greek. I can't think of anything else in the Bible that doesn't sound worse in English than it does otherwise, but, and cutting off some of the significant meaning. But one of the things that would, Nicias certainly could have been a person. Well, not Nicias. So it was